Last week, I went on a cruise of Chesapeake Bay with the youth group. Now, I will tell you that Steve Leonard is a knowledgeable and careful captain, and he has a wonderful, secure boat. And yet, the whole time I was sailing, the theme from Gilligan's Island kept rushing through my head. Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a delightful trip that started from this tropic port aboard this tiny ship. The mate was a mighty sailor man, the skipper brave and true. 5 passengers set sail that day for a 3-hour tour. A 3-hour tour. The weather started getting rough. The tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the famous crew, the minnow would be lost. The minnow would be lost. The skipper of the minnow and that first mate Gilligan, an eclectic group of passengers, ended up shipwrecked on a desert island for 3 years. And as much as I loved our youth, I did not want to end up shipwrecked with them. And the threat of shipwreck was on my mind because we have been thinking about stormy seas for 3 weeks now. The Bible story appears in 3 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and this week as we read in Luke. And each person tells the story in their own way, and yet it must be very important because each is included in his gospel. Jesus and the disciples were traveling through the land of Galilee and teaching the good news of the kingdom of God. And Jesus was an excellent storyteller. He had a life-saving message, so the people were just streaming out of all the nearby towns and villages to come and hear his stories and his parables. One day, he decided to take his message and his ministry across the lake to the people in Gerasene. Jesus and the disciples got in a boat with plans to sail across the Sea of Galilee, just a 3-hour tour. At first, the sailing was smooth, and Jesus fell asleep. But storms are not uncommon on the Sea of Galilee. It's a low-lying, shallow body of water that is prone to squalls. And so without warning, a windstorm whipped up, and the waves became so wild that the disciples, some of whom were well-seasoned fishermen, were very afraid. And they woke Jesus up shouting, "Don't you care that we are perishing?" And Jesus rose and rebuked the winds and waves, and they were suddenly calm and silent. Now there's 3 main characters in this story: the disciples, Jesus, and the sea. We've looked at this story from the viewpoint of the disciples, and we learned that while life is unpredictable, we don't have to go it alone. We've learned to acknowledge the storm, and then to call out for Jesus, and then to watch that presence, that divine presence, rise in our hearts or the hearts of our friends and family so that together we can find the way forward. So even if we've been sucked in and washed up and blown over, we'll find a song in our heart again. We've also considered this story through the role of Jesus. He absolutely shocked the disciples by rebuking the wind and the waves, because they suddenly saw the divine power in Jesus. Jesus is more than an impressive rabbi, more than a charismatic teacher or skilled healer. He is the Son of God, and that just changes everything. His purpose isn't just to survive the boat trip. It is to get to the other side where he can share the love of God with others. Jesus doesn't simply calm our personal storms. He asks us then to follow him and live and love as he does, so that our homes, our neighborhoods, and maybe even the whole world can look more like the kingdom of God. So what about the sea? The wind and the waves have a powerful personality in this story. If your experience of the sea has been to see the waves gently caress the shores as you stroll down the boardwalks of Ocean City munching on Fisher's popcorn, then you're not going to connect to the fear of the disciples. However, if you can remember Hurricane Willa, Michael, or Florence from last year, if you remember Superstorm Sandy from 2012, if you can remember the flooding of Irene in 2011, if you can remember the lives that have been lost and the homes and businesses that have been washed away, then you're going to connect, you're going to resonate with the disciples' fear. The sea can be unpredictable and dangerous. Often in the Bible, it's used as a metaphor for chaos and peril. The sea, Moses led the people from bondage to liberation through the sea. And the sea has threatened those who have tried to follow God. One psalmist writes, "Save me, O God, for the waters are up to my neck. I have come into the deep waters, and the flood sweeps over me. I am weary with crying. My throat is parched. My eyes grow dim, waiting for God." Other psalmists see the sea as a reminder of God's power and protection, writing, "By your strength you established the mountains. You are girded with might. You silenced the roaring seas and the roaring of their waves and the tumult of the people." In every case, the sea is both a symbol for human calamities, like drunk drivers careening down the roads, or addictions resurfacing, or cancers that just won't remain in remission, or people abusing their power and making the lives of others miserable. And also, the sea is a very real force of nature. So we can relate it to hurricanes, forest fires, tornadoes, and floods. How do we respond? You know, recently in the Midwest, when that flooding came, and as people's streets turned into rivers and the local playgrounds turned into lakes, there was a man who, to get away from the water, climbed onto the roof of his house, and he began to pray to God. While he was up there, a young lad from the neighborhood came by in a canoe and he said, "Climb in, and I will save you." And the man on the roof said, "No, I will be saved by God. I am praying." So the paddler stroked away. Well, then, not long after, a local rescue team came in a motorboat, and they said, "Climb in and we will save you." And the man said, "No, it's okay. I'm praying to God to rescue me. I have faith." And so the motorboat putted away. Finally, a disaster responders in a helicopter came. They hovered over the man's roof and they let down a ladder and they shouted, "Climb on and we will lift you to safety." And the stranded man yelled back, "I'm okay. I'm praying to God for rescue and I have great faith that he will save me." So reluctantly, the helicopter crew flew away. The water continued to rise and swept the man from his roof. And as the waves closed in over him, he drowned. And when he got to heaven, he confronted God and asked, "I had great faith in you. Why did you let me down?" And God replied calmly, "I sent a canoe and a motorboat and a helicopter. What more did you expect?" When mayhem strikes, whether it's personal loss or a community-wide disaster, having faith means looking for God's helpers and working with them to save as many as possible. In a moment, We're going to hear from one of God's helpers, Jeff Holland. He is a river keeper. Jeff Holland is a river keeper. The Arundel Rivers Federation uses science, restoration, and community action to make the South, the West, and the road rivers cleaner and healthier. The goal is clean, fishable, swimmable waterways for our local communities. Today, Jeff is going to share his experience about the knowledge of the riverways and his experience of faith. Jeff Holland.
Thank you, Pastor Wendy. It's a privilege to be here with you today on this beautiful morning here on the banks of the Chesapeake Bay. I'm not a scientist. I'm a poet and a songwriter and a historian. So I come to this job with a unique perspective, but I've always had the opinion that there is no difference between science and religion. I believe that God created the heaven and the earth. Before that, he created the waters around the earth. And then he created evolution. That's my opinion. So, but think about that water that he created so long ago, that salt water that surrounded the earth. That's the same water that's surrounding our planet today. It's the same water that flows in and out of our tidal estuaries and our rivers and streams. It's the same salt water that's flowing through our veins, even as we speak and breathe and our hearts beat today. It hasn't changed, even though the nature of the water changes from water, liquid, to vapor, to ice, and back again as it flows from the rivers and flows up into the clouds and flows down by the rain and into the trees and up again in an endless cycle that's been going on for eons. This is part of us. This is who we are, and this is why it's so vital that we take care of our water. It is us. It is within us, and it's all around us. 400 years ago was when the first Europeans came to the shores of the Chesapeake Bay, and soon after they brought with them the first Africans. But before that, there were people living here. Archaeologists have discovered that there are people living not far from here, just a few miles away from here on the shores of the Patuxent River on Jug Bay. A whole culture, a whole civilization of people who lived here as many as 10,000 years ago. And they were able to live and exist and have a thriving civilization without having a negative impact on the waterways. Mainly because they didn't interfere with the natural scheme of things. In those days, there were beavers everywhere, creating beaver dams and ponds and lakes that allowed the water to absorb into the earth straight from the clouds, straight from the rains. The first thing that our settlers did was kill all the beavers and sell the pelts to England so they could make hats. And then the second thing we did was we cut down all the trees so we could plant tobacco. Well, with the trees gone, the roots weren't holding the soil in. The soil got washed by the rain into the rivers and filled up the rivers and left areas where the soil was depleted. The next thing we did was our fishermen fished out all of the oysters. Where 400 years ago, when John Smith sailed by here, there were enough oysters in the bay to filter every drop of water every 3 days. That's 18 trillion gallons of water. And the water was crystal clear. But today, because of over-harvesting and diseases and the lack of habitat, there's only 1% of that historic population of oysters. And so the water cannot replenish itself. We're in the situation that we are today. The fourth thing we did was we are all loving our bay to death. How many people here love the Chesapeake Bay and love your rivers? Of course we all do, that's why we're here. But between 1950, there were 8 million people in the 65,000 square mile watershed of the Chesapeake Bay, and now there are 18 million. And not only are we here flushing our toilets 9 times a day, but we're also building houses with roofs and driveways and roads and parking lots that are impervious surfaces that the rainwater can't reach the soil and soak down in. And so that water rushes off and takes with it all of the pollutants, the fertilizer, the dog poop, and all of those other pollutants that wash right into the creeks and into the rivers and into the bay. What that does is the pollutants, the nutrients, allow the algae to bloom. That darkens the water so the sunlight can't penetrate to the bottom to allow the seaweed to grow. It also, as the algae dies, uses up all the oxygen and kills the oysters and is hard on the crabs and the other fish. So what we need to do, what can we do? Well, climate change is making the problem worse. It's creating stormwater and more rains that are harsher and more frequent. Last year was the rainiest year on record in the 180 years that we've been collecting data. We normally get this much rain. Last year we got this much rain. This year is going to be even worse. All that does is, again, washes more pollutants into the bay. What you can do is take responsibility for that stormwater that lands on your property. How much impervious surface do you have? What happens to the rain that comes off of your roof? It comes down into your rain gutters and the downspouts. What happens then? What happens to the water that rushes off your driveway? What happens to the fertilizer that you put into your lawn? Do you clean up after your dog? These are simple things that you can look at. And the way you do that is next time it rains, put on your rubber boots, put on your rain slicker, get an umbrella, and watch what happens. It's fascinating. Watch what happens to that red water that comes out of your downspout and down to the driveway and down to the gutter, and where does it go from there? That's your responsibility. Take care of that. And you can do that through rain barrels, through rain gardens, through cleaning up after your dog, through all kinds of things that I can tell you about. Pastor Wendy has my information. If you'd like me to come and look at your property and help you decide what you can do to be a better steward of the bay, I'd be delighted to do that. So there are wonderful things that we can do. When you go to a restaurant, ask for a drink without the straw. Straws are a huge pollutant in our ocean ways. Don't use plastic water bottles. Get a real water bottle and drink real water. There are simple things we can do. The problem with the last 400 years is we have taken the easy way out and made poor decisions, a billion irresponsible decisions that have led to where we are today. And the only way out of it is for us to consciously make good, sound, responsible decisions from here on. And that's what we can do by getting better educated and just looking and understanding what is happening starting with our own properties. So I want to thank you for your allowing me to come and address you today, and I'm just delighted to be here and grateful for the opportunity.